So, the real core of today's lecture is sort of like finishing up some of these pieces of what does it mean to be a creator, why are creators thriving, that sort of stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the power of demonstration and openness as these kind of like aspects that creators have. And then we're going to move sort of into the meat of this, which is like, how do you actually start to conceptualize all of these things we've been talking about into a book overview or into a podcast or whatever it is? Because the real goal of these sort of last 3 weeks is really just to sort of get people thinking a little bit about like, okay, if the world's going to see me differently, right? The world's going to see me as someone who is creating something. And so I am, Marina the blank, as opposed to Marina who's, a Georgetown alum, blah, blah, blah. But you are a creator of something. What does that look like? What do you want to create? And how do you tie those together? So that's kind of what we'll do in sort of the workshop portion today, is help you build that. And then all of you will be getting kind of an email from me with a calendar invite to sort of find basically half an hour to sort of talk through your plan. And the idea is to loosely come in with a bit of a plan. I'll put some documents up for you to fill out a little bit, but the real thing is just to sort of go in with this open mind of where you want to go, and then we can figure out something that you would create that would sort of help you do all those pieces. So with that, let me sort of open up the deck here and take us through a little bit of what we're going to do as we go. So I think the couple things that we're going to really focus on today is we're going to talk a little bit more about a little kind of recap on purpose. And the reason we're going to talk about this concept of purpose just a little bit more is because I do think that if there's nothing that you sort of can focus on out of this at all, is that the people that sort of thrive as creators are able to open these doors really do start to have a clear sense of aspirational self. Where do you want to go? And so sort of if you sort of continue to say like, all right, I know what I am today, but where do I want to go? If you can sort of nail that part of it, we can figure out cool stuff to do. But the hard part is if you're like, well, I don't know, fine. Like a lot of people don't know, but I think the important thing to sort of think about is that. So we'll talk about that. We'll then talk about this concept of demonstration and openness and kind of why they work. There's an interesting thing. And for those of you who've taken a startup class with me, you'll sort of understand as we go through this kind of why it plays out. And the last piece is we'll sort of talk about how to create a book overview. And we're going to do it in the context of a book overview, but if you are, I want to create a podcast or I want to create an event series, it's basically sort of the same. So either way, those will sort of play. So last week we did kind of two exercises. We did the this for that exercise and the emerging tech exercise. And so, not everyone was there for it. Not everyone finished those things. But the goal of those exercises was really to have folks try and brainstorm kind of startup ideas. And not because we want to necessarily start a company, but because it will help us understand what we're curious about, what we want to explore, where we think there's opportunities in the world. And so it's kind of a way to sort of get creative. So I guess I'll kind of open the floor up for anyone that was, hey Jess, for anyone who was sort of going through, we'll get through it. If there was any magical startup ideas that anyone wants to share with the group from this exercise that they came up with. So I know Marina, you weren't here and said, and asked for forgiveness of not doing it. So you're off the hook. But so that means Jim, did you have any magical startup ideas that you developed from the exercise we ran through last week?
Well, I had a few interesting ones. So, I do a lot of communication skills training with organizations, and it's people always struggle for how to actually apply them. So, as I was kind of looking at some of the technologies and that kind of thing, the idea I came up with was sort of like creating a Waze app for conversations. How do you use that metaphor to help people kind of get through the places they get stuck and figure out, some detours and that kind of thing. So I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet, but it's kind of an interesting idea that I never would have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, it is funny. Like I watched everyone's face. As soon as you said it, everyone's like, I see. So exactly, like I see what you're saying. How, I don't exactly know yet, but it's an interesting way just to be able to communicate that, like what you're thinking about. And yeah. I totally can understand. I mean, again, like you said, I don't know how to build it, nor is that sort of the problem yet, but it's an interesting way to like summarize what you would like to solve or how you would like to solve it. So.
Yeah, it was a cool exercise. I got a bunch of other little kind of ideas that we'll see where they go, or maybe they'll kind of blend together. But
are you game now to get a tattoo from an Airbnb tattoo artist from my last pitch? No,
not that one. Or a different one last time. Yeah.
Good. It's good. Maddie.
So again, I'm not sure if mine made any sense or viability, but I thought about like community sharing and then CrowdStrike, who I'm like a huge fan of. I have friends who do a lot of tinkering on their own home networks, like out of to learn, but also just kind of for fun.
Yeah.
And what if you could get that into a community sharing where people literally are like, I'll solidify your home network like for extra money, like because they already know how to do it. Like the idea was, again, you use a skill you knew, but like you can make a little cash on the side.
Yep.
I've learned a lot of people don't even reset their router password. So like you can go through a lot of basic things, right? Especially people who like work from home and do a lot of different things. That was kind of my idea. I talked to a friend about it who actually does tinker from home. He's like, that's a good plan because people have asked me how to do this a bunch and they don't realize how easy it is.
Yep. So I will give you a this is a good idea piece of data point. So this is what the former founder and CEO of Geek Squad, his name's Robert Stevens, is interested in this very idea right now. He's like sort of exploring it for real. Is this concept in some way, shape, or form of now that our homes are becoming smart, like there's questions of security and integration, all that sort of stuff. So Geek Squad was 1.0. Now there's like, whatever it is, some other squad type of thing that has to solve this next wave of problems. So you're on the right track, I would say, if Robert thinks it's interesting. I'm a huge Robert fan too. So there you go.
Awesome. Thanks.
Jessica.
Hello. Sorry, I was a little late. I wasn't sure if we were still meeting.
All good. We're here.
All right. So I did have an idea from last week. So I kind of came into this with thinking of two directions. My background is finance and like picky eating, becoming a foodie.
Mm-hmm.
My idea doesn't really necessarily have to do with those things.
Yes. There you go.
But the train of thought I took was like Airbnb for food fanatics. And what I'm really thinking is like an air hosting for events. So like how Airbnb took the market of like the hotel industry to individuals. I was thinking that there might be a way to do that with event planning. And so then combining that with like the past year, I've had a lot of friends who have been out of the workforce or having children and that sort of thing. So we have this huge untapped market of women who are at home, but like we'll host these gorgeous like Etsy, Pinterest parties for their friends and for their family members. And so I'm thinking, well, what if after they've already bought all this stuff, created all this stuff, they continue to do it, but like sell their services with some sort of air hosting thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm exploring.
I like it. It's good. It's good. There's
you could do that with like part-time work too. I feel like there's a lot of untapped jobs. Like one girl here at MSB, I just hooked up with my friend who's a stay-at-home mom for that exact reason. Ashley Berghoff, I think you know her, Eric. She needed a part-time employee like ASAP. And I have a friend who's a stay-at-home mom she used to be like a school administrator. So crazy organized, crazy smart. They're able to sync them. So if you could do like part-time work of that type with stay-at-home moms, that'd be cool too.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking is, okay, you've done a lot of the work once already for this anyway. So then it's also bringing some extra income in on the side, but it's not, a huge time commitment throughout the week.
Yeah. There's a whole, so Floodgate, which is a fund that invested in us, they basically believe, that's a thesis of theirs, that stay-at-home moms are an untapped resource that more companies need to go to tap into. So Hourly Nerd, if you know that company, is a company that sort of was started with that predication. Another one is it is a nutrition app that sort of went after the same thing of stay-at-home moms who are nutritionists to be able to do nutrition virtually. So I think there is this resource certainly where you can sort of arbitrage the market, where people want the flexibility, and so they're willing to trade off price for flexibility. And those sorts of opportunities certainly are real. They're real. No, it's cool. I like it.
Yeah, well, and I was like surprised because I was just starting to jot things down after we had talked before, and I got the idea and then was on my way to practice. And on the radio, I'm like, it could even be like entered into the wedding space, right, of event planning for this. And literally 5 minutes in, I changed the station on the radio, and someone gets on and is like, yeah, such and such famous person just did her wedding at an Airbnb. And I was like, oh my God. That's what I'm thinking.
The stars are calling you. I like it. It's good. Cool. It's cool. Funny how these go when you don't know exactly where they're going to go. They just sort of magically happen. It's cool. Kyle, how about you?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've been making lots of noise. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. You're good.
So I didn't complete my exercises. I did a lot of them, but not all of them. So I didn't put pen to paper on my actual ideas. But in terms of looking at the matrix of companies and stuff, Airbnb, just like everybody else, was kind of on my list. And as you know, I do things in the blockchain space. And so I've heard about companies like this, but and I actually have a friend who started one, but it crashed and burned pretty quickly. And I think something that I learned from your class that why I want to do it is that I actually figured out a user and a user need. But basically, you've probably heard of it, but like Airbnb for underutilized computer processing power or graphic processing power, so GPU and CPU. And basically, the user would be someone like my boyfriend. He does brain research for the military, and he has to go up to Aberdeen Proving Ground like every couple of weeks to use their supercomputer to do run the data for his brain research studies and stuff. And we talked a little bit about how much he hates going up there. When he was a PhD student, he didn't have access to supercomputing power unless he went to some other school that had it. And so this solution where you kind of rent out space on your laptop or your computer, or businesses could share resources and be able to run big data sets and stuff in a decent amount of time, instead of if he does it on his own laptop, it takes weeks. Basically using an underutilized resource just like you would an extra bedroom in your house or a couch or whatever, and being able to share it among different people who need to run data. The data can be encrypted and all of that kind of safety stuff. I've thought through some of it, but that's one idea.
I like it. Very cool. Very good. Feels like a little Silicon Valley with their Pied Piper. So I think you're kind of in the right track there. I like it. Shabnam? Maybe not. No. All right. Well, we'll keep going then. So I think the key reason we do this exercise more than anything is to get you thinking about what you're curious about, right? And I think, Jessica, you were saying, I wasn't even thinking about this as an area. That's a sign you should lean into, right? Where you see these things that you were just interested in, those are places that you can create something. And I'll tell a story in a little bit about drones and weddings that will maybe pique your interest a little bit, about how these things can sort of play out, and why that you may be able to create something that may some ways make it more likely that you're likely to be successful with that company and those sorts of things. So so I think that's the idea, is to help you apply constraints and brainstorm. And so as you're coming up with potential book ideas, apply some of these same things. I am interested in X and I'm interested in Y. Well, maybe there's a combination here that has something interesting to create. And that's part of this, is that people who sort of say, I can't think of any ideas, my first question is, well, tell me the things you're interested in. And usually I'm doing this exact same thing of combining to see where things are. And sometimes you'll find there's 3 circles that you want to combine to find the interest. So I hear people tell a lot, to really succeed, you've got to pick an area and really focus on it. And my answer is always or you kind of combine areas that you're interested in and focus on those. You don't have to pick, you just combine to sort of do it. So that's kind of the purpose of this exercise, is to get you thinking about sort of how you can brainstorm and find constraints as a way to go along. So cool. All right. So we're going to keep kind of racing along here a little bit today. We're going to cram in a bunch, but just feel free to ask me questions along the way. And like I said, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing today is to really prep for our conversation next week, to kind of plant the seeds of how to be thinking through a lot of these pieces. So last week we talked about purpose. And again, purpose is this word that I both love and I hate. I love it because the people that are thriving today do have a clear sense of self. They sort of know where they want to go. but yet like the word purpose kind of can feel like a little overwhelming and sort of like make people stuck. So what I always think about this concept is like finding your aspirational self, finding what is that tiger in there that you want to be, and owning that, right? That idea that like, I do want to do this, I do want to go in this direction is great. And the trick is that oftentimes people will sort of self-edit. They'll say, well, but that's impossible, right? I could never do that. And I want you to sort of put that to a side, right? I want you to say like, listen, what would I ideally like to be or do or have? Because what you'll find is the power of creating something like a book or a podcast or whatever it is, it's fucking magic. Like I've seen it happen so many times, and I can't say this enough times that like we oftentimes will do this to ourselves. And I will tell you this is a very interesting one that I've learned. I always, for a while, I was always curious why in my classes where sort of they were, so not in my MBA classes, but in my undergraduate classes, which is an entrepreneurship class, it was typically like 80% men. And I was always like curious why that was. Well, and it was because a lot of people, like this idea of starting a company is like this big risk. You have to kind of admit that you want to be the tiger. And so today, now that I teach this book class, my class is actually 60% women and 40% men. And the reason I believe it is because it doesn't feel so scary and crazy if you're doing a book that can lead you to where you want to go. So part of it, I would just say this, is that I think we oftentimes like convince ourselves that we can never become the tiger, so we don't even talk about it. And I think if you put this step in the middle of saying like, all right, I do want to become the tiger, but I don't have to like jump out here and start killing gazelles. I can sort of take steps along the way. That's what creators do, is they sort of de-risk these things that feel crazy. So when we talk on the phone, I'm going to ask you, like, is that really what you want to do? Like, really, really, really? And so I want you to own that, like own where you want to go, because you'll find if you think of this a little differently, you certainly can. And so curiosity is the place, right? There's these exercises have a lot of been designed to like help you ask those questions. You know, you probably didn't quite expect this class where we're talking about like a book to have almost no talk of a book yet, right? It's all on like self-reflection. It's all on discovery of that, because we don't do this. We don't ask ourselves like, really, what do we want to do? Where do we want to go? And so our trick in all of this, our plan together is by, our call next week, I want you to sort of just pick a direction, and I want you to be a little uncomfortable because you're like, I don't have all the answers, but understand that when you pick this direction, you automatically are more likely to succeed. The challenge is that many people never pick any direction. They sort of are like hoping for the perfect direction. And so if you pick a direction, know that it will evolve, you'll be much more successful. And the trick is kind of once you pick that direction, we're going to talk about how a book can be this tool for you to demonstrate that direction. And that's sort of where the magic happens. So again, what I want you thinking about in all these things, if nothing, is, even if you can't come up with a book idea or don't know what it is, I still want you really focusing on this. Who do you want to be? And I can help with a lot of pieces along the way. And so once you have something to sort of understand that direction and then do something related to it, that's where the magic happens. Once you have credibility, suddenly doors will open. So the trick in all of this one is like identifying that self-identity and then doing things that helps match the reality. And that's where sort of demonstration comes in. So that tees us up with the word demonstration. So demonstration as a word is a powerful word. And the reason I picked this image is because it sort of illustrates what I mean by demonstration. And so, this is, I think it's a picture from the Women's March, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's not. I think it's actually a picture from South America. Take it back. But for any of you who went to like sort of in DC, I went to the Women's March, and it was the most awe-inspiring thing. And it was amazing because there's just so many humans there, and like you literally couldn't move. There were so many humans. And so what's powerful about it is if you've been to a demonstration like that, you'll realize the power of gathering people, the visibility of it, different than clicking on a button online saying like, I support this cause, right? Like there's demonstration is active, as powerful, and is gathering. So that's why it matters, is I want you to think about this as something that you are creating power behind when you do it properly. So this is what we've talked about the creator's triangle when we looked at this concept of these people that are creators, is that they had a really good balance of these efforts: purpose, demonstration, openness. So we spent last week talking about purpose. Today we're going to talk a little bit about demonstration, because when you have sort of purpose and then the next step is like you demonstrate it, suddenly power starts to happen in really unique ways. So let me give you a little context as to why this today has become so powerful. This is a new thing. This is not something that sort of historically we really could do. So historically, as we sort of talked, we had to sort of borrow credibility from institutions because that's really the only way you could create your own, you could have credibility. There wasn't really this way to create it. And the reason was simply put, it was a limitation of our human brain. There's actually science behind it. So there's actually kind of some science that shows how many things we can keep in our brain. And so if you look at the human brain historically, we can really only hold a few things in our brain to sort of manage sort of unique concepts, thoughts, value things there. So really the number is about 155. We can only hold about 155 relationships in our head to sort of weight them as valuable. So I'm going to run a quick experiment with you guys to sort of prove this to you. If I ask you the question of like, recommend a restaurant for me to come to in your hometown, right? Like most of you are probably going to be capped out at about 5, right? Like you're going to say, I know this one and that one, and that's just the limitation of our human brain. So that limitation of our human brain basically applies to humans as well. I can't manage that many relationships. So if I'm meeting new strangers, I can't know whether you're good or bad. I just sort of had to assume. I could never know. So instead, basically what I would do is to make this easier on myself, I would say, great, if you went to a good school, if you worked at a prestigious company that I in my head knew was prestigious, I would then grant you that credibility. And that's really the secret of all of this stuff. It's a human brain limitation. We would sort of designate these things. The Ivy Leagues are prestigious. So if you went to the Ivy League, voila, I can assume you're good. And that was how this played, right? Like you say, all of these people are associated with these institutions. I can't know whether you're good or bad, but I can know that the institution is. I can say, I know these 10 institutions are prestigious, and therefore everyone who's associated with it gains that prestige. It's this sort of basically credibility by association is the way I would say it. And that has sort of worked. So the big change, though, that happened over really the last sort of like 5 years in particular is really 2 big changes. The first one was the internet, and the internet itself granted us a huge amount of power to basically be able to now have information at our fingertips. So we're not limited sort of by the information in our brain. Now we have access to it. The second change that happened, sort of we can thank Mark Zuckerberg and others, is that all of us wind up now having a presence online. So the crazy thing is, and whether this is in the dating world or whether this is in the work world, the first thing that we all do before we're going to meet someone, we Google them, right? Like that's the first thing. And like, I think there's actually like a term for it in the dating world, like that, I can't remember what the name of it is, but basically like you swipe someone on Tinder and then the next thing you do is you Google them right away. There's someone told me there's a term for it, but basically we are all doing that in life. And so what has changed now is that all of us now are able to be findable and understandable as someone who has credibility. And so again, I'll give you this one, right? Now the change where I said before, come up with a prestigious restaurant, you can now figure out and sort of just look, right? You can look on Yelp, you can look on Google, and you can see how many are there. So that has basically changed to that fact that we now can create our own credibility. So I don't just have to like look at which institutions have credibility. I mean, I still can do that, but now I can sort of say, great, like I know these people have some level of prestige, but now I can Google all these people, all these individuals, and I can look at them and see what they've done. What have they created? What do I see about them? And basically what we learned is that not only can you see who's has done some stuff, those that have done stuff actually have superpowers. And so if you've done something credible, like you've created something, you've done a book, a podcast, whatever it is, it creates exponential credibility. So the reality is that the power that we used to get, the credibility that came from institutions, has waned over the last 5 years, whereas the individual's created credibility has gone up. So if you look, again, back at the sort of the Forbes 30 under 30, this group, 85% of them, and again, there's 3,400 people that are deemed to be prestigious, whatever that means, sort of deemed to be credible. 85% of them have created something before they created a company or whatever it is. So they're people that did something like that. And so they sort of demonstrated their credibility, and that we see it. That's why they are sort of recognized. And so what we found when we started to study these people is that there's actually 9 things, the ways they demonstrated to sort of give them credibility. And this is what we saw as the power of demonstration. Once we understood it, you could teach it, which is the magical part. So there's these 9 things that are effectively how people who are thriving today, young people who are sort of standing out, do it. They create and publish books. They organize conferences or event series. They actually create some level of research and they publish it or they share it. They basically do a podcast or some kind of an audio series. They do a video series. They create designs of things or products and they put those out. There's a concert or an art piece that they do. They do article series, sort of written pieces, or they do courses. These are the 9 big things that people do. Now, there's one on here that's kind of surprising to people oftentimes, and particularly me as an entrepreneur, I was sort of surprised to see it. And that is that startups are not on the list, right? Like, why are startups not on this list? Well, here's the big interesting thing. So first off, it's really hard to know and judge if a startup is good or bad, right? Like, you just can't tell for the most part. And so that creates sort of a whole set of problems with it that I think makes it challenging for someone to know whether it's good or bad. Whereas if you look at these things on your face, typically you can judge them to say, I can pick up this book and read it and know whether it's good or bad. I can attend that conference and know whether it's good or bad. I can read the research. I can do these things. Startups don't have that transparency. So everyone sort of has a startup, and so we sort of discount them all. Startups themselves can be good things, but they don't wind up themselves be ways that we demonstrate. So interesting part, right? Like, of a lot of the group of the Forbes 30 under 30, they did have startups, but most of them, the vast majority, over 90% of them that have a startup, did one of these things first before doing their startup company. So what makes kind of the key characteristics of something the way you demonstrate? The first thing, and I think perhaps the thing that's important to note, is real demonstration requires depth. So I tell people this: you can't tweet your way to demonstration, right? Like, there's just no like depth behind it. You have to sort of take that knowledge and share it in a way that is more meaningful. So that's why you see things like article series or books over something like, tweeting a bunch. The next thing is that there is this real sort of concepts on openness that we'll talk a little bit more about. But what I mean by that is basically demonstration is about revealing what you know. So there's a book out there that's called The Advantage by Patrick Leoncini. And what he shares is the internet has basically removed something that was called an information advantage for 99% of cases. So basically, like, even if you know something, the internet can basically share it with so many other people very quickly. So you're actually better off if you learn something unique, sharing it openly, than you are trying to like monetize something that is your secret sauce. So an openness factor on this one. And some examples of this is you see people who like publish books and they basically tell you exactly how they did something. That's an example of this concept of openness. You don't patent things today really in the same way. Creators, they share these pieces. Demonstration is typically tied to purpose. So you see demonstration of this thing of saying, like, I know this person is doing this and I see that how this fits into their long-term goal. That's a key characteristic. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but demonstration really does open you up to criticism and feedback. And it's actually a positive thing, but some people get really nervous. Like, I'm working with an author right now who's incredibly nervous to put her book out there. And I was like, well, tell me why. She's like, well, because people may not like it. And I was like, that's sort of the fucking point, right? Like, the reality is like, if you don't get that out there to get feedback, you'll never improve. And so demonstration is really core because it allows you to get feedback quickly and evolve on it, that we'll talk more about in just a second. And then sort of the last piece that ties into that is that demonstration really is evolving. You continue to change and tweak as you go. So as you think about this a lot, real sort of demonstration isn't sort of this one-time thing that you do and you're done with, right? You don't publish a book. You actually publish a book and then already start thinking about when you're going to publish the next edition, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Demonstration is not sort of I said it and I forget it. It is sort of this thing that continues to go and evolve as you learn more. So the thing that people ask me, in particular my wife asked this question of me. She's like, listen, I sort of feel like you're just creating a bunch of people that are going to like be a bunch of those annoying people on Twitter that are just talking about themselves and showing off all the time, which is a fair critique, right? It's sort of this thing that I can understand why someone could say that. Like, who wants to be that jagoff, right? Like, nobody does. But I'll talk to you a little bit about the research behind it that'll show you why this isn't just being a show-off, why this isn't sort of this narcissistic sort of self-promoter when you think about this the right way and why it actually works. Before I do, I want to talk a little bit about this guy. And so this guy, if you don't know who this is Chance the Rapper. And to me, I think Chance the Rapper's story really sort of demonstrates the power of demonstration in a really unique way and why he's sort of cracked the code. There's, Chance is like a lot of people. There's a lot of people doing it, but Chance's story is so unique that I think it's powerful. So I'm going to quickly tell the story of Chance the Rapper a little bit more now, so you get a sense of why I'm such a big fan of him as a musician, but also as a creator, and why his story is so powerful. So quick story of Chance the Rapper. Chance was a high school senior and got busted for the 3rd time for pot. And, you know, he basically got suspended. Not basically, he got suspended. And so you think about this kid growing up in Chicago, gets suspended, 10 days is what he was suspended. He does what any kid like this busted for pot would do. He spent those 10 days in the library. Now you might be thinking, like, that's kind of weird, like, what are you talking about? But the cool part for Chance is that in Chicago, his neighborhood library had recently put in a recording studio. And so the cool thing for him is he's like, listen, I've always loved music. I want to become a musician. And so, you know, he could have been that guy who talked a lot about it, but instead he spent that 10-day suspension in the library, every day going in there, trying to learn how to record music. And that's what he did. At the end of those 10 days, he basically had a couple tracks that he had done, and he released them. He put them out there in the world for free, for people to consume. And people in the local Chicago scene were like, this kid's pretty good. This is great. So he basically got some feedback from this sort of releasing his music on SoundCloud, took that feedback and spent the next 8 or 9 months kind of working it, tweaking it, changing it. And at the end of that sort of 7, 8, 9 month period, he released his first album that he called 10 Days. Based on the 10-day suspension that he had. He put it out there on SoundCloud and basically started to get feedback. And so he had a bunch of people who were starting to like him. He was named one of the up-and-coming hip-hop artists. This is about 2012. And so he basically got back in there, went in the game, continued to learn how to put on music, festivals, perform, and stuff like that. And he went back in and he put out his next album. And that's when things broke for Chance. Suddenly, he put his music out there again for free on SoundCloud, and the next thing you know, this album was downloaded over 1 million times in about a 2-month period. It's crazy. He was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. He was a headliner at Lollapalooza, and this guy broke. So suddenly Chance the Rapper, who'd been a nobody, becomes a somebody. And so at that point, he sort of had this opportunity in front of him. Every single major sort of label out there was like, this guy's the next thing. He's got a fan base. People love him. Let's sign him. So Chance the Rapper went out to LA, went to New York, and met with all the record producers. And almost all of them offered him basically a contract. And Chance looked at it, and he thought about it, talked to a bunch of his people that he knew, and he said no. He turned down the fact that he was going to basically sign with the label. What he realized is that, historically he needed them, but what were they going to do for him? He was already headlining at Lollapalooza because he had built his own brand. He already had millions of followers. He thought differently about it. What he said was, I'm going to do this myself. And so that's when he released an album called Coloring Book that we'll talk about a little bit more. Now, Coloring Book was his sort of his first real major mixtape that he put together. And Coloring Book had other performers on it. It was a pretty big deal. The mixtape dropped. Again, he put it out for free on SoundCloud, put it out for free on a lot of these places. It was the first streaming-only album to chart on Billboard. It came in at number 8. And this thing started to actually gain steam. People loved it. Critics were saying this was one of the albums of the year. So here's where Chance the Rapper broke the entire fucking system. And that is that the Grammys are basically the biggest award show for the music industry. So the Grammys have been around about 70 years. Now there's a catch to this one. If you want to be nominated for a Grammy, there's a rule that's in place. And that rule says your music label must nominate you. Well, what doesn't Chance have? A music label. So here's Chance the Rapper, one of the most popular artists at the time. And in 2016, he's basically out there kind of sort of playing the game. He's out there, he's working, he's got music out there. Critics love him. People keep saying we want to nominate this guy for a Grammy, and the Grammy's we can't do it. Well, what happened? Basically, he's listen, I don't want to have a record label. People are well, why don't you just get a record label just for this purpose? He's listen, I don't need that. I don't need you for the platform. I have my platform. That's what I already have. So what do? They changed the rules. They literally changed the rules to allow him to be the first non-signed artist ever to be nominated for a Grammy. And so he was nominated not for 1 Grammy, but for 7 Grammys. And he won 3 of them, the first ever person to do it. Now, you can say maybe Chance is unique. Chance is not unique. He is a normal person in this process. He thinks about the way the world works differently, and you'll hear a little bit more about it. But Chance is basically a creator. He has created his own credibility and cut out the middleman. We've sort of figured out how to do that. You guys talked a little bit about like Airbnb and kind of, this world. Really what Airbnb done is cut out the middleman of hotels and allowed you basically through a platform. SoundCloud is the platform here, but Airbnb is the platform there to basically connect directly to someone who wants to rent your place. Same thing with what's happening here. So Chance is one of the people, just like, is Forbes 30 under 30, who's done this same sort of thing. And so I want to quickly play a little bit of a clip for you guys of Chance the Rapper on the Jimmy Fallon show. So again, you're just gonna have to watch it, but it's sort of amazing to see how basically Chance the Rapper breaks Jimmy Fallon's brain. And so you'll hear the interview with Chance the Rapper, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more in just a second. But this is an interview where Chance was on Jimmy Fallon, and he explains to Jimmy Fallon that he doesn't sell his music.
Everyone who don't know Chance the Rapper, you don't sell your music. No, it's free. Yeah. Do you know you can't. How do you make money?
Well, I'm on tour right now. I'm a touring artist. As music grows, there's always new ways of releasing, and there's visual albums and full concerts and big Broadway musicals and so many ways that music moves around that like I feel like trying to fit it into a for sale album is kind of obsolete now. So it's like it gives me more space to create and put out stuff.
Yours is the first streaming only album to chart on Billboard. Number 8. Coloring book. I just think it's called Coloring Book, and is it you have the merch?
I brought you a gift. Yeah,
appreciate this.
That's for you.
That's my color, man. That's my color. Or
that was good too.
Yeah, perfect.
Give them both sides.
Yeah, I look like Luke from the Gilmore Girls. That's a shout out to the Gilmore Girls. So you're on tour now. Where are we gonna see you? What are you doing?
So I just played Meadows Fest in New York last night.
Do you like the big festivals, or do you like the smaller clubs, or do you like them both?
Honestly, festivals, there's a lot of logistical problems that go, with playing like a big fest. There's too many artists, and you got to find catering and all types of stuff. I like it when it's just my show, and I show up and
just do it up.
Do my thing.
You really do. You do your thing. Thanks so much for coming back and doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So remember what he says, right? And I want to highlight this a little bit, right? He said, I don't make that much money. I mean, the numbers on the music industry are sort of bonkers anyways, like all the cuts that come out of it, like you don't make very much money, period, on selling it. But what he says, I make money on merch and touring, right? Primarily. Do you see what he did there? You want to see like what the magical thing that he did? He got Jimmy Fallon to fucking pimp his merchandise that he makes almost all the money on, right? Number one. And number two, Jimmy Fallon asked him the question, do you like the big festivals or the small ones? You know why he likes the small ones? Because he makes more money, right? Like he's basically figured out the entire thing. And so what's interesting about Chance, and again, you may say, oh, he's already a big star, but remember, Chance was just like many of us, and that he put out his first thing to get it out there, got more feedback on it, improved and iterated. And that's really the secret of what he did, is that today we are basically more likely to succeed when we do these sorts of creations. And again, that's what we found with this entire group, is that it's not about necessarily sort of these big, gigantic things that you sort of, have to do. It can be these small acts of demonstration that allow you to succeed. So again, when you think about the story of Chance the Rapper, he knew his purpose. He wanted to break into music. He was willing to do whatever it was. But he wasn't one of those people who sort of like got so infatuated by sort of someone else saying, hey, you've made it. He basically just continued to demonstrate. And that's really the secret of that one. But what he also did is he sort of used this power to basically become a superstar fast. So he demonstrated on his own. And then what he did is he basically used the power of openness. And what he did is he continued to evolve his music, right? He put out this music to get feedback on it very quickly. He was constantly putting stuff out. He's still putting stuff out. So that what he's doing is he's evolving and getting better. The secret of this entire thing of creators is that they are able to evolve faster than normal humans, because they know their purpose, they demonstrate it, they get feedback on it, they improve and they iterate. And that's really what creators do. So creators are people as we say, that openly demonstrate their purpose. This concept of creating these aspects, these things that share with you, helps you succeed. And so what happens in this one of why this sort of works is it creates this sort of cycle that you can wind up thriving. So if for those of you who've ever taken my class, right, this sort of starts to look like something else you've probably seen before. This looks like lean startup, although it's just a lean human, right? Like what we've really figured out is that we can take these things of sort of iterate, test, measure, iterate, test, measure. We do these sorts of things to improve ourselves. So the reason the creators thrive today is that they are basically able to evolve themselves, their brand, their message, their opportunities so much faster because they understand themselves, they know which direction they're going, but they're not like, oh my gosh, this is the biggest thing. This is my current direction. You demonstrate it, you get feedback on it, and you evolve where that direction goes. What that starts to look like is this, right? As you continue to evolve yourself, you wind up deepening that purpose. As you do these things, you get to know yourself much better, and at the same token, you wind up strengthening your credibility. This is sort of the power, is that creators like Chance the Rapper are able to sort of evolve much, much faster. You could wind up going and getting a bunch of degrees or graduate stuff like that, but the reality is that if you wind up sort of just picking a direction, running after it, you understand it better, you evolve as you go, and ultimately you wind up strengthening it. That's why Chance approaches in that way, is that he's basically iterating on his own direction. He is one of those people who's able to take that feedback and go. So I want to go back to this question that I asked, right? Like, aren't you just sort of a show off? Which I think is a legitimate reason why people don't do this, right? There's this like, you've seen these people, right? Like they're sort of the self-promotional people who just promote themselves, right? Like nobody wants to be that person. And so I'll tell you a really interesting piece of research. So researchers basically wanted to know, what did it look like if you sort of bragged, right? Basically the idea was if you are someone who brags, does it mean something? And so what they looked at is they looked at people who basically bragged about something, and they asked the following question. Are they bragging about something that they should brag about, like they have sort of a backing behind it, or are they bragging about something they don't know anything about, right? They're just sort of showing off. And they then looked at sort of the perception of others in it. So what happens is if you brag about something that you don't have any reason that you should be bragging about it, nothing to back it up, no demonstration behind it, nothing, people actually view you worse. So your credibility decreases. It's sort of one of these like sort of sine curves. It goes worse. If you say nothing, nothing. But if you brag and you don't know anything about it, people view you worse. On the other hand, if you brag and you have some backing behind it, some knowledge, a book, a podcast, whatever it is, people actually, your credibility becomes exponential. So again, it's worse if you brag and you don't know shit about it. It's nothing if you don't brag, but if you do brag and you have something behind it, it actually is powerful for you. So in the words of Muhammad Ali, it's not bragging if you back it up, basically. And that's what the power of demonstration is that you do want to basically get your voice out there. You want to share. You want to be open with it, but you want to have a reason that people will trust you, respect you, and build more credibility. The reason you thrive today and can thrive in today's world is that the internet now gives people a way to find us, but also a way to prove that they should listen to us. And that's what demonstration does, is it gives you tools and backing so people say, oh my gosh, like, Marina actually knows something, and I'm hearing it. I sort of respect her more because she's sharing about it. And so the reason that we talk a lot about books is because really this is just the platform that we start from, but demonstration is one of those things that is it's constantly evolving, right? Chance, you heard him talk about it. There's future of Broadway musicals. What is a fucking hip hop star talking about Broadway musicals? Well, it's ways that he can continue to demonstrate his passion, his purpose, and ultimately some ways monetize it. So we start with things like books, right? And what I tell people is, if you don't know what you want to do, just write a book, start, right? Like if you want to demonstrate that way, that's a great place to start. There's other things to do, but it's a powerful one for a couple reasons I'll talk about in a minute. But that can lead you to other things. Like you can use this to leverage a podcast series like Brian, or you can use this to turn into an article series like Matt, who has an article series in Sports Illustrated. You can use your book to leverage a conference that you may want to do, or you can use your book to video series like Daniel. Really what you're really trying to do is, again, be able to share more of your voice, more of your ideas with other people. You learn how to teach other people, and that's really the power of all of it. So I want to play a quick video, and then I'll give you guys a chance to ask questions or thoughts on it. I know that I'm sort of spitting a lot at you, but one of the biggest things that people say to me about this one is like, how in God's name could I write a book about something I don't know enough about anything, right? Like how, like you're just crazy, Eric. Why would I write a book when I'm not an expert? If I work for the next 10 years and then I have knowledge, then I should write a book, right? And so I want to share a little video from this woman, Debbie Millman, who I've never met, but I've sort of like, I've become such a fan of for sort of the way that she approaches this question. So let me play a quick video of Debbie and then we'll talk a little bit more in just a second. All right. Oops.
Confidence is overrated. I learned this from Dani Shapiro, the great writer. We were talking about confidence, and she was like, confidence is really overrated. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, most confident people, like overly confident people are kind of obnoxious. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Usually they're compensating. She said, what's more important than confidence is courage. And I was like, oh my God. Confidence is created from repetitive success at doing something. You know you're going to get the ball in the basket. You have confidence shooting. I know how to create branded products. When I meet with a client and talk about how we're going to reposition their brand, I've got confidence. I have all of that stuff that I've been doing over and over and over again that's been successful that I can pull out of the suitcase and say, that's why I believe that I'm right. If you haven't done something before, how could you ever expect to have confidence doing it? Confidence comes after you've done it enough times successfully. So what's more important, especially in your 20s, is courage. Courage to take the first step before you've had the success. Secret of Life by Dani Shapiro.
And so I think that's important, right? I think obviously in all these sorts of things, the challenge is like, you know, is this real? Is this really make sense? Like, come on now, you got to be kidding me. And I think what is important to sort of note about this is that these steps in this process it is an evolutionary process. You have to sort of be willing to grow and thrive and do it. And when you do it, right, this is what happens. You sort of develop this sort of confidence as things go over time, but you have to take those first steps. You have to take those first moves. But if you do it in the right way, where you're learning and you're not sort of putting yourself out there in a way that you feel threatened by, that's where success happens. That's why creators thrive, is they don't start by saying, I'm going to do this amazing, huge thing. You do small things. You put out your first song on SoundCloud, like Chance the Rapper did. You interview that first person for your book, like many of my authors do. You do that first interview for your podcast, whatever it may be. And so that's really what the power is this idea of sort of picking that direction, going quickly along that direction, learning, iterating as you go, and then sort of using this to more publicly demonstrate those ways. It's not sort of the thing where you have to jump into it and say, do it. You sort of evolve as it goes. So I want to play a quick video from a guy named Shane Mack, and I think I want to play this video because I think he sums up a lot of the things that we've been saying, and I think he crystallizes a lot of the things that are in all of this of sort of why it works. And Shane is one of my best friends. Don't hold that against him or me, but I think what's Shane and I basically got to meet each other a while ago, and part of it was Shane's urging that this class happen. Shane today is the CEO of one of the hottest bot companies. He is partners with Microsoft, with Google, with Apple. He's amazing, and has. But I think his story is one that I think will give all of us sort of hope a little bit to see how he's played. And I think his adventures have been an example of real, like, creating your own credibility. So this is an interview I did with Shane about a year ago,
Sure,
or about 6 months ago.
So thanks for having me. This is great. It's my first time actually using this microphone on a webcast, so it feels super professional. It's how to fake signal. For me, it all happened kind of by accident. I think that's why I'm so fascinated by this class and this project and this whole thing. I came from Western Illinois University, which I don't know if you know, but you probably don't know. And it's just a state school in Illinois. So I didn't come out with a lot of high signal. I didn't really have anything. I was finance and economics major, and I worked as a business manager of a nonprofit theater in Peoria, Illinois, making like $30,000 a year, thinking this is business. And I was really looking back 10 years later, I'm like, how did I get here? And what we've been trying to map out is really everything in my life that I didn't do what was expected, or I did outside of my job and demonstrated things ended up being the reason I got the next step of my career. And it was when I moved to Seattle, my brother convinced me to move, and I was in this job. And I ended up at the same time kind of seeing all the shit was wrong. And I was the only person who would walk around being like self-aware and be like, I really suck at this job. I probably shouldn't be doing this. And I was telling people like, I kind of suck at this job, but I was the only person that was actually saying that I kind of suck at the job. And then my boss was like, you should be promoted. Like, this is like, and I was like, this is really weird. So then I was like, I wonder if I could just ask people like one piece of advice that they don't always get asked. Because I was kind of just curious, and it led me to do this ebook. And I just basically did this ebook randomly. I didn't know how to do it. I asked 30 people like, hey, can I ask you one question you don't always get asked? And then will you give me one piece of advice you don't ever get? Because I'm basically telling people what I suck at and I'm getting promoted. And so what happened was I started asking, and everyone kept saying yes. And so this little project 10 years ago led me to ask a guy named T. McCann, who I didn't know at the time, but was working for Paul Allen, the founder of Microsoft. And he gave me some great advice about persistence. I put this book out. It was a thing. He wanted to share it. He sent it to a bunch of people. This little object of a simple ebook at the time, really, I mean, it was 35 pages long, became the reason that TA wanted to talk to me. And I remember I sent TA my resume before that. I don't think he ever opened the email. I was like one of the first people that had email trackers. And I was like, I really wanted to work for this guy. And then he never responded to anything. Super busy. He's like, I'm not gonna get this resume. And then I asked him to do something with me, and the power of then putting it out together. And then all he wanted was something else. And I was like, oh. And so then all of a sudden he's like, hey, come by the office. And I was teaching myself how to code at the time. And he's, like, I don't know why you would work here, but I just like what you're doing. And just keep doing more of it. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. I'm just going to keep sending you stuff. And so I end up, at the time, I used the product he was building called Gist. And he was building this little tool. And I thought it was really, really confusing and cluttered and kind of like noisy. Eric used it as terrible. And I was like, what if I just give him really honest feedback? Everyone's trying like, oh, I love you. I bet you're amazing. And I was like, I'm just going to spend all my time giving him the most honest, helpful feedback and actually rebuild his product. So after we did this book, TA then would respond to my emails. And I was like, well, I have his ear. I should just keep sending him stuff. So I spent about a month. I redid almost the entire product. I rewrote every word of the product, every flow, every email I got from them, the marketing job. And honestly, it's like not my place to say anything. So I didn't really know what to do. I just sent an email that said, I hope this can help. And I remember sending this email. It was about a month's worth of work. I was not the expert of email marketing or product design or whatever. I just thought maybe this could help. And he wrote back and said, why don't you come in and work for me? And I remember that moment, and I was like, huh, like, didn't send a resume. He has no idea I went to school. I honestly don't even think I told him my major or anything I've done. He just liked that I got him involved with the book, and he was with other people, and we demonstrated that together. And I was the one that was telling him like an honest truth of myself, like being self-aware and saying what was wrong. And I was like calling out like things I sucked at, and then what I thought his product sucked at. And that led us to have a connection that I didn't have, or he didn't have, and he ended up hiring me. And that single move for me led to then I was like, what else can I do publicly to always be the one that's kind of like being self-aware and honest? And so I went to write a book called Stop With the Bullshit. And really, I just wrote everything that I thought was bullshit about corporate America. And then that led to be like, I'm almost like, I really wish I could say that. And like, you can say that. It had, and every time I did something, everyone thought there was going to be like a repercussion to it, or that something was going to go wrong. And it just opened more opportunities and more doors and more people and more connections. And it just kept compounding. And then TA taught me the value of really spending time demonstrating daily. Like he was like, every day, do something for someone else with a skill that you have. Build something for someone else, or get them involved with something that you can do together. And that kind of stuck with me over the last 10 years. And so we went on to grow Gist and then sell it to BlackBerry for like $45 million in 2009. And then that led me to meet Eric. Eric got me to San Francisco. And I think I always kind of think about, what can you demonstrate that you've built, done, or excited about that everyone else is not walking in with? And that's kind of how I see the lens of the world. And for me now, 10 years later, I think looking out of like who we're hiring, I haven't hired anyone with a resume in fucking years. Like, it's always the people that are doing something on the side that's creative, that they're passionate about, that they enjoy, that they're truly an expert in. And that's been the big light for me is, you know, it's really noisy out there and you can find everybody. So how do you stand out? And it's always things you're doing on the side. And so for me, it's been a huge, you know, way of also we look at hiring, like people that think creatively, they're curious, they're doing things that aren't expected of them. I think the future of work is really, you know, the people that will actually break the rules a little bit. They want to try new things. They don't accept the way it is and they want to make it better. And I find a lot of signals in hiring the right people for that DNA, which I think is good places to work. And the people that do things like core is and their side projects and what they're doing inside, like doing improv, like that's a great example. And then that demonstration and the stories you get from that and the value of what you're doing with that has so much that other people don't have. And so, you know, it's been a crazy 10-year ride, but I think everything that I didn't think was the right thing to do is the reason and like thing that got me to where I am.
So it's, you know, I think Shane's story is just a fascinating one. And again, I think there's a the reason I play the whole thing is because I think it's just sort of illustrative of what's going on. And that is that I think you are these small actions that you wind up doing that, you know, again, Shane started out with a series of small actions that became bigger and bigger and became something that he was able to demonstrate to is something that turns out it's not just Shane, right? It turns out that people today that are winning are doing that. And they're doing these small things on the side that are not necessarily, you know, things that are taking slight bits of risk, like bits of courage that turn out to be something pretty great. So let me wrap this last piece here, and then we'll take a quick break and answer questions at all. I think, you know, the key thing to understand is that the fallacy of this demonstration stuff is you don't just put more stuff out there. It really is that you have to sort of openly share what you care about. And I think that's what really matters. So let me quickly talk a little bit about this last piece, and then I'll let you guys take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll go from there. But I think the key thing is that as you think about all of these pieces together, as you start to think about how you use it to facilitate credibility, it's really what the core of all of this is. You have to start with the outcome, right? Like, where do you want to go? And I think that's the thing as you're thinking about all these things about how do you become a creator is ultimately what you heard from all of these people is that they did have that sense of aspirational self. Where do they want to go? What's that outcome they want to do? And you have to start there, because it's sort of, you know, the worst thing you can sort of do is say, I want to write a book because I just want to write a book. Or I want to do this podcast because I just want to do a podcast, or I want to, whatever it is. You sort of, if you think at the end of where you want to go and then figure out how this fills in, all the better. And I'll give you a couple quick examples of how these individuals did it. You know, Will McDonald is working at a venture capital firm. Jacqueline runs her own startup company. Shiv is a soccer scout, and Antonio worked for a fast-growing company in San Francisco. All of them did these actions that they were doing. They were doing all these things that they helped understand, they deepened, they were sort of doing these small acts of demonstration that what they ultimately did is they pulled them together into something more meaningful, into this demonstration through a book. And that is what we call sort of demonstration of your purpose, openly demonstrating through this way. It wasn't as if they sort of said like, hey, oh my gosh, like look at me, I'm going to write this book and see what happens. They sort of did these acts that did it. And so what's important to understand is that if you know where you want to go, the book can be the bridge to get you there. The book can be the credibility to sort of get you to a place you want to go. You have to think of it in that way as a tool, not an end in of itself. So if you think of it as a tool, you'll be wildly successful in doing it. And I think that's the important part. This act of sort of demonstrating your purpose gets these people over here, this group of people that are sort of the aspirational you, to sort of see you in a different way. And that's kind of what creators do, is they do these things that lets other people look at them and judge them and say, this Kyle person seems like they're like us. We should help them get across to where they want to go. And again, I think what you understand is the book itself is powerful in that way. It sort of signals to other people what you want to do. So I'll pause there for just a quick second, and then we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how to turn all this into sort of the next piece, which is like putting together what you want to write or what it may be. But I'll pause here for just a quick second, and then we'll take a little quick break. But any questions, comments, thoughts on this stuff? Any clarifications I can do? Again, I know I spit a bunch at you, but what kind of questions can I answer? Jim has one.
Well, it's not a question. It just was sort of an aha when you were talking about chance and openness. And, it reminded me of a couple of things that I've heard of or seen, like Basecamp software company.
Exactly.
The only way they hire people, it's like they code on a project. So they already know people because they're picking from an open source community.
That's right.
And Chris Sacca, he's an investor, big time investor, and he, people want to send him pitches. He said, "Don't send me pitches. Send me your URL. Let me see what you've already done, and then I'll take a look and be curious." And more towards what we're doing, there's this project called I think it's called the School of Life. Alain de Botton, if you know him, and I just stumbled across this the other day. He actually has online something called the Book of Life, and it's literally just online. They're not charging for it, so it's very chance-like, to do that. So just thinking about that is not, the book is really trying to get you somewhere and to be open with it instead of trying to kind of keep your good stuff to yourself. That was it was a good aha. So thanks.
Yeah. You'll find, and it's interesting, like whenever anyone goes through this sort of like little 3 weeks with me and they come back to me, they're always like, I can't unsee this anymore. Like everywhere they look, they'll see, you'll see, like, it's always what I always tell people is like, whenever you see someone who's succeeding and you're kind of like, why did that person do it? If you look at it in this framework of openly demonstrating your purpose, you'll almost inevitably figure out why. It's like, oh, I see what they did. It's a new thing that no one quite talks about in this way. And you'll see, it's the thing, right? Like it is the thing. And we were just sort of surprised, again, of these 3,400 people, the fact that 85% of them fit into this concept of like, that we could find, right? Like some of them may be more than that, but 85% had this specific creation event, which was sort of this activity they did that helped them. And when I talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, that's me too, or that's me, or that's me. So it's sort of a framework to look at life. And number one, once you understand it, well, then the next thing you can do is apply it. That's the secret, is that a lot of people are like, why is Chris Sacca so great? Well, you can mimic what Chris Sacca does. You may not be Chris Sacca, but at least you can not do the dumb shit that people do hoping to be Chris Sacca. You can do the things that actually are work. And that's why I love this thing. Like, again, most people don't see the world yet this way, but that's how it's working. Like it's playing out this way almost every single person. Do you have a question, Jessica? Or?
I have a couple comments. So just two things definitely kind of struck me as well. The openness, I want to agree, because when I first started getting the idea, I was like, oh my gosh, should I tell people about this or should I not tell anyone about this? Because I don't know if I should let people know, or if I should keep it close. So that definitely,
it's not natural, right? We all think that it's not natural to think this way. It really isn't. There's this sense that oh my gosh, someone's going to take it. They won't actually. They'll just help you make it better. And if they do take it, good for them. Someone else will help you, to do these things. It's just a mindset shift. That's an old world mindset. An old world mindset when you could win based on an information advantage that does not exist anymore. So the internet's taken that away. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And the other thing that I really noticed too was when you were saying, okay, well, this isn't necessarily, what your skill set is right now. That's exactly what came to mind. Is I'm like, how did I wind up at event planning? I know nothing about event planning.
Yeah.
So it just resonated with me, I guess, for that part too.
Yeah, it's you know, the Debbie Millman comment, the Shane Mack video, all those things are, you know, illustrative of it. It's that we as humans naturally want to root for people that are creating, that are trying to do those things as well. And so what you'll find, and this is a crazy thing, right? Like I've got 100 authors right now that are in the midst of their game, their sort of process. And what's always surprising to the author, but not surprising to me anymore, is how big deal people want to root for someone who's working on something. When, you know, when you're taking a risk in that way, like, you know, there's like a guy, Dylan, who's an author who's publishing a book on, the book's called Play by Heart. And it's basically how to minor in music in college without taking a single music class. And he talks about how he continued to like get better at music by playing with bands and by doing the things on the side. And so he basically reached out to the founder of SoundCloud and said, like, listen, your software changed my life. I'm a big fan. I'd love to see if you would be interested in reading my manuscript. The guy got back to him, yes, I'd love to, and is writing a blurb on the back of his book. That's crazy. Like, it shouldn't happen. But it happens because he was open, he shared, he was really clear about what he wanted to do. And then this person is like, I respect that, I love it, and I want to help someone who's demonstrating. I'm sure that guy gets a bazillion emails of people who are like, you know, sycophants who sort of want to like say how great he is. But Dylan is actually doing something and trying to contribute, as opposed to the flip side of it, which I think changes that. There's another guy named Jerome who, his first chapter talks about Kendrick Lamar, who's kind of another up-and-coming hip-hop artist who's sort of broken out this year. And Jerome really wants to get Kendrick involved in his book and his project. And so he's done two smart things. The first thing that he did is he basically sent a tweet to Kendrick Lamar and said, hey, everyone, like, I want Kendrick Lamar to get involved in my book project. Retweet this to get him to hear it. In 3 days, he had 200 people retweet his tweet, which is sort of crazy. The second thing that he did then, back to sort of Jim's comment about, like, it's not about money per se, is he decided that he's going to donate all the proceeds from his book to Kendrick Lamar's charity, which, again, the design of that one is to say, listen, it's not actually that much money. He's not doing, like, Jerome's not doing it for the money anyways. He's doing it because of what the things will lead to it. So if you remove the money thing and you suddenly put that in the hands of the person you want to influence, well, magical things start to happen. So now the other person who's writing a blurb on the back of his book, the CEO of the Obama Foundation, right? Like, those things happen when you do sorts of open things that are surprising. And again, there's a reason why a book is powerful. It's because it has the perception of prestige, of work, of sort of effort behind it. Well, there's other ways to do it, but I think certainly the fact that particularly for people in their 20s and 30s, there's not a lot of young people who take the effort of writing a book because there's this fear, to Jessica's point, that I don't know enough to write a book. And my answer is like, you can just structurally learn enough to write a book. You don't have to know enough yet. You have to learn it and then sort of share what you learn. And that's sort of the magic of all these things. There you go. Yeah. So do you guys want to break or just want to keep going for the next, like, it's about 35 more minutes. You just want to keep going? Yes. Okay, we'll keep going. All right, cool. So now we're going to go into the fun part. I'm going to